car, this time with the Queen at the wheel, driving through the Balmoral estate. In recent days, other leaders have shared stories from Balmoral of barbecues cooked by Prince Philip as the Queen laid the table. These are memories I treasure too. Special times in what was clearly their happy place. I did, however, experience one rather tense moment at Balmoral. My husband and I were with the Queen before dinner when the drawing room light started to flicker. To my great alarm, he was, after all, in the presence of Her Majesty, my husband suddenly leapt up and darted across the room. Peter had spotted the cause of the flickering light. One of the Queen's young corgis, a beautiful pup called Sandy, was eating through a lamp switch. Thankfully, tragedy was averted and Sandy emerged unscathed, though not before a stern ticking off from his mistress. Just like all my predecessors as First Minister and all Prime Ministers, I deeply valued the time I spent alone with the Queen. Her words of wisdom, counsel and humour will stay in my heart for the rest of my life. However, the memory I cherish most is not from Balmoral or from audiences at Holyrood. It is from 2015, when the Queen opened the Borders Railway. I spent the journey from Edinburgh to Tweedbank with just her and Prince Philip, enjoying their recollections of times spent in Scotland. Now, that would have been special on any day. That it was also the day the Queen became our longest reigning monarch, allowing me to observe closely how quietly reflective she was about that historic milestone, made it so much more so. It was one of the great privileges of my life. What was obvious then, and on every occasion she graced us with her presence, was the Queen's genuine love of Scotland. Indeed, her first official visit was here in Scotland when she opened the Aberdeen Sailors' Home in October 1944. In the decades since, the Queen has been intrinsic to the story of modern Scotland. From the opening of the 40s oil pipeline to the Forth Bridge and later the Queensferry Crossing, the Borders Railway and the hosting of 3 Commonwealth Games, she was present at so many of our iconic moments. She was also a true and steadfast friend of this Parliament. On the day we reconvened in 1999, she allowed the title Queen Elizabeth, Queen of Scots to be used. She also presented us with our treasured mace. Its words, wisdom, justice, compassion, integrity, describe values personified by the Queen throughout her entire life. Even as her health declined, Her Majesty inspired us with an unfaltering dedication to public service. In his address on Friday, the King recalled his mother's words on her 21st birthday. "My whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service." For 75 years, Queen Elizabeth more than fulfilled that vow. She performed her duties with dedication, wisdom, and a profound sense of service. She set an exceptional example to all of us. Our nation is in mourning today for a Queen whose loss we have not yet begun to come to terms with. We are deeply honoured by the presence today of His Majesty King Charles III and the Queen Consort. Your Majesty, we stand ready to support you as you continue your own life of service and as you build on the extraordinary legacy of your beloved mother, our Queen. Queen Elizabeth, Queen of Scots, we are grateful for her life. May she now rest in peace.
I now call on Douglas Ross, Leader of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party.
Your Majesty's Presiding Officer, the news from Balmoral on Thursday evening rocked us to the core. Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was a constant presence in our lives throughout her 70-year reign. For many of us, it's difficult to imagine our country without her. The Queen seemed as permanent as the stones of Edinburgh Castle, a constant while her country around her changed. When Queen Elizabeth II became monarch, Winston Churchill was Prime Minister, and she was served in that role by 15 political leaders, offering them a wealth of wise counsel from her long experience. From the Queen, who lived through the Great Depression and the Great Recession, the Second World War and the Second Gulf War. The length of the Queen's reign meant that she was an anchor to our history, ensuring that whatever changes to our country and how we lived our lives, we retained an enduring link to the generations that had come before. She was a living reminder of the sacrifices made to build the country and the world that we live in today. What other leader could have reassured the nation in the darkest days of the COVID pandemic by drawing on their own memories of children being separated from families during the Blitz? Time and time again, Her Majesty gave us certainty, stability, joy and happiness when we needed it most. That's why the scenes that we saw on the final journey from Balmoral to Holyrood Palace yesterday surprised no one. From the heart of Aberdeenshire to our capital city, young and old came together to pay their respects. Scotland's unique tributes saw tractors and horses interspersed with members of the public who came in their tens of thousands to line the route. Because while monarch of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, we know the late Queen held Scotland close to her heart, and we held her to ours. We feel the pain of her loss so strongly with our new King and the entire royal family today. As they grieve on a personal level, we join them in mourning as a nation. In her final speech to this chamber, the late Queen said, "It is often said that it is the people that make a place, and there are few places where this is truer than in Scotland." But I think we can also see that the Queen shaped modern Scotland during her 70-year reign. And we know that the bonds and ties to Scotland developed and strengthened by the late monarch will be continued by King Charles III. You, sir, became the first sovereign to accede to the throne while on Scottish soil in over 400 years. You have already served Scotland with great dedication as Duke of Rothesay, Duke of Edinburgh, Earl of Carrick, Baron of Renfrew, Lord of the Isles and Prince and Great Steward of Scotland. And I know that people across the country will show you the same support and devotion as they did your late mother. Because today we don't just commemorate the reign of our Queen, but also celebrate the life of a woman who many in Scotland knew and loved, who dedicated her life to her country, to duty and to serving others. On behalf of the Scottish Conservatives, I am proud to support the motion of condolence today, to thank Queen Elizabeth II for her long, loyal and dignified service, and to offer our full support and loyalty to our new King. May Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II rest in glorious and eternal peace, and from all of us, sir, God save the King.
I now call on Anna Sarwar, Leader of the Scottish Labour Party.
Your Majesty, I offer my sincerest condolences on the passing of your beloved mother, and my thoughts remain with you, the Queen Consort, your sons, grandchildren, and all the royal family at this time of deep sadness. First and foremost, the Queen was a mother, and I cannot imagine the intense feeling of personal loss you're experiencing while fulfilling your devotion to public service as our King. I hope it gives you and your family much comfort that we are all grieving the passing of someone who was so special, cherished and loved by us all. Her Majesty was a constant in our lives. Many saw her as family. Many saw their family in her. She reminded me of my own grandmother. Her walk, her demeanour, even the way she held her handbag. But she also touched generations. I returned home on Thursday night to a crying 6-year-old who said he was sad because he will never get to meet the Queen. Queen Elizabeth II was also a constant reminder of the need for kindness and compassion in our society. So often in our politics, both today and throughout history, we focus on what divides us. But from the Blitz to the pandemic, the Queen brought our nation together. She was the great unifier of our country. She brought joy at times of national pride. She brought comfort at times of national tragedy. And she brought light at our nation's darkest moments. We will never forget how Her Majesty the Queen found the words during the pandemic to remind us all that we will meet our loved ones again. Words which are more poignant than ever following the passing of her husband, Prince Philip, your father, who now rests at peace with his beloved Lilibet. We know how much she loved Scotland, and we loved her back. She reminded this Parliament that despite our political disagreements and arguments, all of us here are in service of the Scottish people. And her influence was felt far beyond these shores, with the people of the Commonwealth and other nations united in grief at this time. Our world changed beyond recognition during her reign, but her dedication to duty, her integrity, her warmth, and her service to others never wavered. In fact, politicians here and right around the world will look on enviously. In 70 years of service as our head of state, she always seemed to say the right thing, do the right thing, and at the right time. And I am confident that as we enter a new era, we will cherish Your Majesty's leadership and your wisdom, compassion, integrity, and justice. Timeless values passed down to you by your mother, but also gifted to us on our parliamentary mace. We wish you a long and happy reign. God save the King.
I now call on Patrick Harvey, co-leader of the Scottish Green Party.
The experience of loss is universal. It comes into all of our lives. It's a reminder that the reality of human life is not rooted in status or in title, but in the connections we make, bonds of love and friendship, of family and of service to one another. People of all views can respect this, whatever else we may disagree about. So in this moment, as we mark the death of the Queen, I offer my party's sincere condolences to her son, to all of his family, and to all those whose lives she touched. For many people, a monarch stands as a symbol of the country. If this is true, then this is a moment more than one of personal loss for those we stand with in their grief. It's also a time to reflect on the change the Queen witnessed during such a long reign. When Princess Elizabeth of York became Queen Elizabeth II, the UK was still early in its recovery from a brutal world war and had begun laying the foundations of something extraordinary: a welfare state and a national health service to tackle the giant evils of the age. Nearly 3 decades of declining inequality followed. At the last coronation, the oath still referred to other countries as the possessions of an empire, and here at home, human rights and equality were distant ideas, with racist discrimination remaining legal and people treated as criminals and outcasts because of their sexuality. Now we can look back and celebrate extraordinary progressive change, even as we must continue to defend what has been achieved. There are those for whom the long reign of Elizabeth II, and indeed the institution of monarchy, represent continuity, stability, permanence. But in truth, the tide of progress cannot be halted. It feels slow as we live it day by day, but in time it is dramatic. So, Presiding Officer, as Charles III begins his reign, let us hope, indeed redouble our determination, that he will have the opportunity to witness change just as transformational and more. It is still needed.
I now call on Alex Cole-Hamilton, leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats.
Presiding Officer, Your Majesties, we do not choose the life to which we are born, and seldom do we shape the events that define our times. We can only hope to move through life with humility and close regard for those around us, to conduct ourselves in the time that we are given with compassion, with kindness and with grace. The life of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was a towering example of all of those qualities manifest in a single human being. She always kept a special place for Scotland in her heart, as she in turn found ample room in ours. Her passing leaves a profound absence across our family of nations, and these islands are united in our grief. Her Majesty came of age in the crucible of war, a period of gravest danger for our country. It fostered in her a deep commitment to reconciliation, to peace, and a common understanding among nations, so evident in her commitment to the Commonwealth. It's why she told the listening world from Cape Town on the occasion of that 21st birthday broadcast that while she was 6,000 miles away from the country of her birth, she was never far from home. And hence the grief that we feel today is shared across the world. From the Blitz to the pandemic, through times of tempest and times of calm, sustained as always by the Duke of Edinburgh, her beloved strength and stay. She was the embodiment of constancy and forbearance in the face of remarkable change. She sat with presidents and hospital patients, key workers and veterans. She leapt from helicopters and dined with bears. She earned the widespread affection that has been so visible in these days of mourning. In one Christmas broadcast, Her Majesty said, "Not all of us can do great things, but we can all do small things with great love." Presiding Officer, Your Majesties, the measure of her example inspired so many of us to fulfil the promise of those words. On behalf of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, I express our deepest condolences to His Majesty the King, to the royal family, and affirm our allegiance to both. God save the King.
And I now invite His Majesty the King to respond to the motion of condolence.
Presiding Officer, First Minister, party leaders and members of the Scottish Parliament. I know that the Scottish Parliament and the people of Scotland share with me a profound sense of grief at the death of my beloved mother. Through all the years of her reign, the Queen, like so many generations of our family before her, found in the hills of this land and in the hearts of its people a haven and a home. My mother felt, as I do, the greatest admiration for the Scottish people, for their magnificent achievements and their indomitable spirit. And it was the greatest comfort for her to know, in turn, the true affection in which she was held. The knowledge of that deep and abiding bond must be to us a solace as we mourn the end of a life of incomparable service. If I might paraphrase the words of the great Robert Burns, my dear mother was the friend of man, the friend of truth, the friend of age, and guide of youth. Few hearts like hers with virtue warmed, few heads with knowledge so informed. While still very young, the Queen pledged herself to serve her country and her people and to maintain the principles of constitutional government. As we now mark with gratitude a promise most faithfully fulfilled, I am determined, with God's help and with yours, to follow that inspiring example. The title of Duke of Rothesay and the other Scottish titles which I've had the honour to carry for so long, I now pass to my elder son, William, who I know will be as proud as I have been to bear the symbols of this ancient kingdom. I take up my new duties with thankfulness for all that Scotland has given me, with resolve to seek always the welfare of our country and its people, and with wholehearted trust in your goodwill and good counsel as we take forward that task together.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Majesty. I now close this meeting of the Parliament.
Well, hello there. It's almost 6:20. I am Michelle Dewbs, keeping you company until 7 o'clock this evening. If you are just joining us, the scenes that you are watching and listening to live there are the motion of condolence that has been taking place live in the Scottish Parliament. We just heard from First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, as well as the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, leader of Scottish Labour Party, and many others. His Majesty the King as well. Just speaking there, he was saying, among other things, that the Queen found in the hills of this land and in the hearts of its people a haven and a home, referring to, of course, their beloved Scotland. Now, keeping me company until 7 o'clock this evening, I have with me the royal broadcaster and the historian, Rafe Hedel-Mancu, and the Conservative life peer, Daniel Moylan, and the author, Kathy Lett. Before I speak to those, let's cross, shall we, live to Edinburgh and join GBNews political editor Darren McCaffrey. Darren, good evening to you. A hugely historical day over in Scotland today. Tell us more.
Yeah, it really has been an incredible day in many regards. Michelle, as you said in the last couple of minutes, we heard there from Nicola Sturgeon inside the Scottish Parliament talking about Her Majesty the Queen, saying that for people across our country, this is a time of profound sorrow. Most of us simply do not remember life without the Queen. In an ever-changing and often turbulent world, Her Majesty has been a constant. She's been the anchor of our nation, and this was all part of the emotion of condolence that members of the Scottish Parliament have been talking about and discussing this afternoon in the Scottish Parliament. And in the last couple of minutes, as you just seen, we also heard, of course, from His Majesty the King, Prince Charles, who talked about Robert Burns and pledged to follow the inspiring example of the Queen. Interestingly, he's passing on his Scottish titles to his son, the new Prince of Wales, Prince William. But it follows, as you say, quite an incredible, quite an extraordinary day in which we've seen those senior members of the royal family, including His Majesty the King, walk behind Her Majesty the Queen's hearse as it travelled up the Royal Mile here in the centre of Edinburgh to St Giles's Cathedral, the main cathedral here in Edinburgh that stands behind me. And tonight, Michelle, thousands of people, and I can tell you it is thousands of people, are queuing up behind me so that they get a chance to pay tribute to Her Majesty the Queen in person, to pass by her coffin as it lays in rest here in the cathedral until late tomorrow afternoon. It is unusual for this to happen. I don't think it's ever happened to a monarch before, that the people of Scotland have a chance to do this in Edinburgh before it moves on to London to lie in state later on this week. But those images of walking up this medieval cobbled street, this historic street here in the centre of Edinburgh today, with the thousands, tens of thousands of people gathered, 5, 10, 15 deep in places, that image, that sombre mood, the quietness, the silence essentially, is a moment that I think many people in this city, many people in this nation of Scotland will not forget anytime soon.
Indeed, Darren McCaffrey, thanks for that update. Rafe, Darren McCaffrey there mentioning the historical significance of this for the people in Scotland, particularly. They've never had an occasion like this motion of condolence previously, never before.
No, it was a sombre service as the Scottish Parliament bid adieu to the last Queen of Scots potentially Scotland will see until the 22nd century. Queen of Scots isn't a traditional title of the Queen, but it is one that she allowed the Scottish Parliament to use. And it actually, the ceremony really goes to show the transformations that have occurred, profound transformations to this country constitutionally and socially since the Queen came to power. When she came to power, we had a strongly centralised unitary state. Now you could say it's almost a federal state because of the powers that have been devolved to Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And it's reinforced the voice of Scotland. So in a way, it's quite fitting that Her Majesty, who had spent so much time in Scotland and whose ties and affection to Scotland were so important, that she has had this moment, almost as if it was a last tour of her realm on her way down, heading down to England. But also, of course, it's a way, the Queen, of course, opened Parliament in 1999. She opened this building in 2004. and it reinforces the important role that the monarchy has to play in Scotland, because the sovereign has to grant assent to all of the legislation passed in the Scottish Parliament. The Crown of Scotland is carried in with Her Majesty to the opening sessions of Parliament. Historically, when King James VI went down to England, the Crown was used to represent him in Parliament, and it was, after all, the Scottish King and the Scottish Parliament that wanted to unite the unions together. So it wasn't a case of England colonising Scotland, it was the King and the Scottish Parliament who wanted to seek this union with England, and the English weren't too keen on uniting with the Scots, actually. They didn't think of it necessarily as a good idea, but they acquiesced to the King. And so the role of the monarchy with the Scottish Parliament is very deep and very involved and very intrinsic. And I think that all the parties there, noting the Green Party's aversion to monarchy, all the parties there managed to hit the right tone, not choosing this to be a platform from which to pontificate on any particular side of the issue, but to pay respect to a woman who has dedicated her life to Scotland and to the Union.
Indeed. Lord Moylan, this is actually the second ceremony of condolence today, the first one in Westminster Hall. Yes. You were there.
Yes, I was. Let me say, first of all, I think Scotland has shown herself at her most dignified and over the last 2 days, and it's been simply wonderful the way in which Scotland has said farewell to the Queen and now greeted the King, the new King. Yes, no, we had a ceremony this morning. It's a requirement of law that on the death of the monarch, Parliament has to meet immediately. It was established in 1707 in the Act of Succession, and that's what happened on Friday and Saturday. The Queen's death was announced, of course, on Thursday at 6:30 in the evening. On Friday and Saturday, Parliament met, both houses separately, and there was an opportunity for peers and members of Parliament to make tribute to the Queen that went on over 2 days. But the purpose was, at the end of it, to produce an address to the Queen, 2 addresses, one from each house. And this morning, the King graciously came to Westminster Hall to receive those addresses. There were short speeches from the Lord Speaker, who presented the address of the Lords, and then from the Speaker of the House of Commons, who presented their address. And then the King spoke, and then returned his own response to those addresses. And there were about, I suppose, 1,000 people there. Between the Lords on the left-hand side as you looked at the King and the MPs on the right-hand side as you looked at the King. So it was very, very moving. It was very grand, it was very solemn, but I thought the King struck exactly the right note, and so did the Lord Speaker and the Speaker of the House of Commons. In some ways it was very simple, despite the fact that you had, people dressed up and soldiers in, beefeater costumes, and you had trumpets and so forth. Nonetheless, it was a very simple thing. The 2 Houses of Parliament made their tribute to the King, and he received them and returned it. And whilst you're talking, by the way, we're actually showing some pictures. Yes. So just with Camilla, with the new Queen. Yeah, Queen Consort, of course, King Charles. And this is the event that Lord Moylan is referring to here at Westminster Hall this morning. Was it around 10 o'clock-ish? Yes, like it was about 10 o'clock. The King and Queen arrived about 10:20. Yeah, and just before I move on to Cathy, I was watching some of that ceremony, Daniel, and to me, King Charles, and by the way, it does seem peculiar referring to him as King Charles as opposed to Prince Charles. I think that's going to be a period of adjustment. We're going to have to get used to it. Indeed. I think I just called him the Queen a moment ago. Oh, gosh. I have to correct myself just now. I mean, two seconds ago, if you look at the tape. And it's so easy to fall back, but we all have to get used to the fact that things have changed. Yeah, and I mean, we heard the national anthem at that event this morning, and I think that was one of the first times it's been sung in an official capacity. And to me, King Charles, got it right then, he looked quite emotional. Yes, no, I think the King has handled this whole thing extremely well, at a time when, of course, personally he's deeply moved and grieved, I'm sure, by the death of his mother. But he's handled his public role extremely well. And the fact that you can see that emotion under the surface, I think, has strengthened the empathy that has been created and the bond that's been created between him and people at large over the last few days.
Yeah, indeed. Just to recap as well, just some of the activities that have happened today and where we are at the moment. So the Queen's coffin is currently laying in state at St Giles's Cathedral over in Edinburgh. That's now open to the public. It's been open around about an hour now. The first person in the queue got there this morning at 6:45 a.m. That is dedication. And speaking of dedication, Cathy, a slight confession, I must admit, that prior to the passing of the Queen, if you'd have asked me, Michelle, are you like a huge royalist or anything? Yeah, I probably would have said no, not really. However, you know, the last few days have really brought me, and I think there's a lot of people like me, this huge admiration, because whilst we sit here and we talk about these official ceremonies and kings and queens, and, you know, this is a family who've lost their mother, their grandmother.
And also, it's given us great respect for the Queen. When we think back to when she was ascended to the throne in the 50s, women didn't work. You know, most women were tethered to the kitchen by their heart and their apron strings. And there was talk at the time, oh, could a mother fulfil this role? And Churchill, I remember Churchill actually said, she's a mere child. I mean, she was a woman in her mid-20s who had already had 2 children. So there was a lot of condescension. So the fact that she was a working mother, yes, hot and cold running nannies, but she was juggling kids and careers in high heels while wearing a tiara is pretty impressive. And I think it was surprising how we just all hemorrhaged emotion. But I suppose, you know, it's been seismic because she's always been there. She's sewn into our psyche. I read a fascinating statistic the other day that 94% of people in the world have only ever known the Queen.
Yes.
You know, there's only 130,000 people in Britain older than the Queen. So, you know, it's quite extraordinary. So no wonder we feel we know her and that she's part of us. And also, I think, because Britain's going through such a difficult time right now, you know, we've got the cost of living crisis where people are choosing between heating and eating. We've got the Tory party's been imploding for months, and now we've lost our beloved sovereign. So it is a very disorientating time, and I think that's partly why the grief has been so profound.
But it puts it all in perspective as well, doesn't it? Because I think we understand at times like this that the country and what brings us together is more important than transient political disputes.
Yeah, and I mean, just to reflect on some of the things that you were saying there, Cathy. And by the way, if you're wondering what you're seeing on the screen right now, I'll describe it as well for those of you that are listening on the radio. Just been explaining that the Queen's coffin will be St Giles's Cathedral there in Edinburgh for the next 24 hours. So what you're seeing now is members of the public who have been forming a queue for quite some time. I mentioned the first person there, 6:45 a.m. joining that queue. And what we're seeing now is those people passing through to pay their respects. The Queen will be, Rafe, she will be laying in state in London on Wednesday, and people have started queuing already.
Yes, it's remarkable. You know, 750,000 people will be coming into the town potentially. A queue going for miles, hours and hours of people queuing up around the clock to see this woman who has dedicated so much of her life. And people may be wondering, isn't this too much? All of these ceremonies taking place in Scotland and in England. What is the point of all of this? Well, it's because one of the disadvantages of being the world's oldest continuous democracy is that we don't have an annual event to celebrate like a revolution or a war of independence and chance for the nation to come together like on Bastille Day or Independence Day in America. So for us, it is the monarchy that is the focal point of national outpouring. Events like royal weddings, coronations, jubilees, triumphs, but also tragedies, as with state funerals, provide those rare moments for monarchies to come together, for the citizens to have those chances to connect with the crown, with each other. Social cohesion comes into being on these occasions, and it provides us with an opportunity to actually experience our living constitution. We don't have a constitution behind a piece of glass, as the Americans do. Our constitution is a living, evolving system, and the monarch symbolises that constitution. We're seeing the constitution in play with this transition of power, and the Queen connects us not only to that, but to our Long Island story. She connects us back to William the Conqueror, even to Alfred the Great. And that's why when we go there to pay tribute to the Queen and thank her for her legacy, we're also connecting with our great glorious past.
We're also participating in history. A lot of people talk about, you know, you want to pay your respects or you want to see and, you know. But actually, this is a great historic event and we participate in it by actually being there. We participate in it by joining the queue. And people take their children because they want them to participate, to be part of that great historic event, not simply an observer, but to be part of it. And I think that is terribly important.
Yeah, and just to your point as well, Rafe, you know, there are lots of other things that are happening in the world at the moment. And personally, I have to say, I find this quite a welcome respite over the next few days. I'm finding what we're learning, what we're seeing, people actually coming together across political divides. It feels, I mean, hopefully anyway, like this could be a potential turning point for the better for this country.
Well, not just for Britain, I mean, across the Commonwealth, the same. I mean, I was amazed at the outpouring of grief and compassion. Even countries in the Commonwealth who are hoping to become a republic soon, there's still such unbelievable respect for the Queen and commiseration with the King. So
well, you're Australian, am I right? So, of course, the King is head of state in Australia as well. And so just tell me, how would you think he will be received in Australia?
Well, it's a very interesting question because Australia is the most multicultural nation in the world. We are a human minestrone. And if you think of the young Australians, you know, from all different nationalities in the world, what allegiance will they have to a white guy in a castle 10,000 miles away? But I think one thing that he will connect with young people over is the environment. I mean, I know Prince Charles a little, and he's a man of great passion and great, very, very political, and he was way ahead of his time on the environmental aspects, and he's not going to change that. I mean, I know he can't be as outspoken as he'd like to be, but he still has the ear of the Prime Minister once a week, and he's got every single world leader on his speed dial, and I hope he does still keep fighting for our planet. But I think that may be a connection with young people that the Republicans in Australia didn't take into account, that could actually make him more favourable. So our Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, who is a Republican, has said that he won't address the issue for another 3 years where there'll be another referendum. So the reason they had a referendum in 1999, and the reason it didn't go through, it was quite close, was because the politicians were going to anoint the head of state, whereas the people said, we want to vote for our head of state. We want Kylie Minogue, or we want Dame Edna. You know, she's a royal. So that was the sticking point. And if they take that issue away in the next referendum, it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out.
Yeah, and I mean, when you look, we talk about the world more broadly, you know, what we've had, and everything has changed so quickly and all at once, it seems, a changing in political leadership, new Prime Minister, changing head of state. And we almost take it for granted here that it's going to be done peacefully and, you know, we seamlessly move into this new era, don't we?
Well, it's a testament to monarchies in general that constitutional monarchies are verifiably the most stable democracies, the most stable countries in the world. Look at Scandinavia, we look at Britain and Japan, Netherlands and elsewhere. And if you compare, for example, Britain and France in the 1960s, one of the great successes of the Queen was the ability to transform Britain from being an imperial power to a post-imperial power without any of the angst, the strife, the violence, the rioting that you saw in France. And one of the reasons was because the monarchy and the Queen provided that air of stability, the trappings of majesty, the ritual, the traditions, made it seem as if there was a constancy and a sameness and a continuation of the status quo, despite the fact that these societies and cultures were going through such profound political and social change. And I think that can't be overestimated.
Yeah, Daniel, one of our viewers, and by the way, do keep your thoughts coming in this evening. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. You can also reach me on Twitter @MichelleDewbs. Trevor, one of my viewers that's watching as we speak, says, Michelle, our king shouldn't be made to grieve in public. He should be allowed some private time with his family to mourn the loss of his mother before being asked to continue on from where she left off. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen. And what we're seeing, it's remarkable at the moment.
I think that's right, and it's both constitutionally and, in a sense, politically necessary. The old phrase, you know, the Queen is dead, long live the King. The transition from one monarch to another is instant. It is immediate, and the new King has to show himself. As the Queen used to say, you have to be seen to be believed. I have to be seen to be believed, is what she used to say, apparently. So he has to show himself. That's always been part of the ritual of kingship, and he has to be there for his people and be seen to be there for his people right from the get-go. And that time for grieving might come, those private thoughts might come later. So I don't think that's avoidable, and I think it's right that he should be there. Imagine now if he'd sort of said, I'm taking a week off and I'm going to go and hide in a cottage somewhere and I'll come back and let you know how I feel. That isn't the right thing. He understands you've got to be there, you've got to be proclaimed.
Well, it's your duty.
And it's your duty to do that, and he's living up to his duty.
But don't you think also it's rather nice to see him being vulnerable and emotional? Because, I mean, most upper-class Englishmen, you have to do open-heart surgery to know what's going on inside them, you know, stiff upper everythings. But the fact
Even
that
nowadays, when everybody's out there doing their...
Not the upper class. They're still very good at hiding their emotions. And I think the people have generally found that very endearing, that he's allowed us to glimpse him grieving.
Yeah, but I mean, is there not a line, though? Because I know this is different, but there's similarities in my mind. When William and Harry, as little boys, were made to walk behind the coffin of their mum, and, you know, it was almost this very peculiar, you had all of these strangers on the roadside wailing, and then these two little boys walking behind their mummy. And I just find it, at the time, I found it a bit like, oof, it didn't feel right to me.
But that's a very different situation to a man of the King's age being seen in public as the new sovereign. The time of
Is it? That's still his mum. He's still her son.
The time of transition is so important that the monarch be seen, particularly in this case, because for 10, 20 years, perhaps 25 years, there had been great worry about this transition. How would it go? The royal household was very tense as to how the new King and Queen would be received. And it's early days, but it's certainly they must be very reassured by the positivity of the reception that they've got. And you just had to look at also that wonderful side to the new King when he stopped his motorcade at the gates of Buckingham Palace, which we've never seen before, rather than driving through, getting out, had that impromptu walkabout, and the warmth of the reception he received, I thought was wonderful. And people can see that he's in a tender moment, and that's actually causing a greater outpouring of support for him, and in a certain sense, it's forging a new relationship. You've got a chance now to bond with the population because they can see you doing your duty at the same time as struggling under this burden of grieving for your mother. I think that's a very important thing.
Yeah, and Cathy, I'll bring it back a little bit to, we think of Queen Elizabeth, the ceremony of condolence we just heard a second ago in the Scottish Parliament. One of the things that made me smile, actually, is First Minister Nicola Sturgeon. She was just sharing a story in her speech about when she was at a dinner with the Queen and they saw the lights overhead flickering and went to investigate, and it was one of the corgis was basically chewing through the light switch. And it made me chuckle a little bit because I've heard you talk about this as well, the twinkle that the Queen had in her eye, etc. Tell us more.
Well, there's a lot of talk about her stoicism and her tenacity, etc. But she was very, very twinkly and very witty and fun. And I remember I met her a few times, but the time that makes me laugh the most is when I was going down to Buckingham Palace for a party. And I happened to have this suit that's got corgis on it, with little tiaras with Diamante sewn on. I got it made when I was doing the royal wedding broadcasting. So I wore this suit down to Buckingham Palace, and poor Queen, she'd been meeting about 200 people. Her face was in a sort of polite rictus of boredom. And I stood in front of her and said, I hope you like this suit. I wore it just for you, although I'm slightly worried that one of your corgis might mate with my leg. And there was a sort of asthmatic intake of breath from the flared nostril flunkies thinking, oh, put her in the tower. And the Queen just burst out laughing and she said, oh, look, Philip, it's rather fabulous, and brought him over to have a look. And I think she was so relieved not to be treated like a porcelain person, but actually as someone who was real and could have a laugh. So She had a great wit. And
I've got to say that was a special suit. I have seen that. Carol is saying, Michelle, lots of talk, one of my viewers, Carol, lots of talk about Charles the King and Queen Elizabeth II. She's saying, what about Camilla? Michelle saying, my heart goes out to, I'm Michelle. Carol is saying to Michelle, my heart goes out to Camilla, who has looked so strained and sad. She must be feeling the enormity, even though she's been with Charles 17 years. This is a huge shift. And of course, Camilla's got children as well. And now, their mum is now the Queen Consort.
Well, he's so lucky to have her. Honestly, she doesn't have an irony deficiency. She's also got a great sense of humour. She's warm and witty and wonderful. I've known her a long time. I met her in the late 90s and I asked her what it was like, this myopic media attention. And she said that all these well-meaning American matriarchs kept sending her their cosmetic surgeon's card with addresses because they thought she was too weathered and wrinkled. And, of course, that just made her laugh more and gave her more laughter lines. And if you read between the lines on her face, that's what you see, a genuine, warm, kind and caring woman. And, you can tell that he just exudes love for her. Yeah. So theirs is a love story that is passed the test of time.
And I don't know anybody who has not met our new Queen and not left impressed. She has this wonderful ability to make people feel at ease, and she understands her role. That's so important. And we're so fortunate to have her. The problem, the challenge that the monarchy has going forward is actually to imparting that greatness to the realms, because unfortunately, whilst in this country we have come to know and understand Camilla and her charms and her positives, every time there's a royal tour of North America, still to this day, Diana's shadow looms large. And after 25 years, it's remarkable that's still the case, but it's because Camilla hasn't been exposed enough in North America or in Australia or New Zealand. And that, I think, is one of the challenges that the monarchy need to face, is to address how they convey the reality of Camilla rather than the perception.
And I think Australians will like her very much because she's egalitarian. She treats everybody the same, maid to monarch, which is, not that common in the old upper classes.
She don't rub me and talk about the upper class.
Yeah, there you go. The radio viewers are missing what's going on.
I've had something to do with Queen Camilla in relation to adult literacy, which is a great passion of hers and something that not enough people take an interest in. And she just comes across, as I think you're saying, as very down to earth, very, very practical. There's nothing affected about her at all. And I think if people do get to know her, they will see her as the very straightforward person she is.
Indeed. Well, let's cross, shall we, live to Buckingham Palace. There we have our GBNews reporter, Alice Porter. Alice, good evening. Talk us through what's happening at Buckingham Palace End today.
Good evening there. Well, goodness me, the crowds just keep on coming. I've been here for this afternoon and they've just been growing. I presume people have been able to finish work and they've come with flowers. It's been incredibly well managed and people are queuing in a very British fashion, and we've got a sort of one-way system in place as people are very much waiting their turn to come past the palace and lay some flowers down in memory of the late Queen. But it's not the only crowds that are gathering in London at the moment. I understand on Lambeth Bridge people have already started camping out ahead of when the Queen's coffin will be there at Westminster Hall, when it will be lying in state. So incredible to think of people there 48 hours ahead of when that will take place. But tomorrow will be really where the main events will be taking place here at Buckingham Palace, because the Queen's coffin will be flown from Edinburgh to RAF Northolt, where it will then make its way here to Buckingham Palace tomorrow evening, where King Charles and the Queen Consort will both be there to witness it as it comes to Buckingham Palace, where it will stay in the Bow Room overnight. And then the next day there will be a procession which will take it through to Westminster Hall, where she will lie in state there for 4 days. And I understand there will be significant queues, and a number of major hotel chains in London are saying that they're going to be absolutely booked out, and there's warnings on the trains as well, because this is of course such a historic moment for so many people across the United Kingdom, many people wanting to come and pay their respects to the late Queen.
Indeed, Alice Porter, thanks for that update. Yeah, Rafe, back in 2002, I think it was about 200,000 people went to go and see the Queen Mother's coffin, Alice there, just talking about some of the preparations for when Queen Elizabeth II coffin makes its way to London. And we touched on this briefly earlier, didn't we? I went to Buckingham Palace a few days ago, and I was just blown away by how many people were just pouring into that area. Old, young, different nationalities, tourists, just it seemed everyone was turning out.
Well, as Daniel said, it's about engaging with history. It's about becoming part of history. That's another aspect of monarchy, is how people tie in key events in the royal timeline to their own timeline. Everyone will say, oh, I remember at the Silver Jubilee, I was here, I did that. It makes people buy into our national story. I think one of the shames about what's happened now is that we haven't had a train ride down from Edinburgh Waverley to London. I think that would have been wonderful, replicating the train ride at Sir Winston Churchill's funeral in 1965 when Sir Winston was transferred from London to Blaydon Churchyard near Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, and the railway lines were teeming with people on both sides, very solemnly bowing their heads, taking their hats off, something we haven't seen too much of on this occasion. But that would have been wonderful.
Why do you think that's not happening?
Oh, because people don't have hats. and people are too busy on their recording things for posterity on their phone rather than bowing their heads. But I like to think of this really in a way as Her Majesty's last tour of her realm, starting up in Scotland and coming all the way down to London. It's sort of a farewell tour in that sense.
Yeah, and Daniel, we kind of jokingly say about hats and things, but actually technology, society is changing massively. So the session that we saw at the weekend, that was the first time that was televised. Yes. Fascinating stuff, by the way. I was watching it on here with the commentary, and I found it really interesting stuff.
It is.
Go on.
One technology that hasn't changed, and I'm just here putting my transport hat on, because I used to be Deputy Chairman of Transport for London. One technology that hasn't changed, although it's improved, is the railways. And the railways are going to have a really crucial role to play over the next, the remainder of this week. Because transporting, I mean, hundreds of thousands of unexpected, unplanned for people into the capital and taking them out again. You won't be able to bring your car. Give up any idea of coming by car, unless you're really going to park right out on the perimeters. And people are going to travel in by train. I know that a lot of planning has gone into the transport for this event. It's gone into it for years ahead of this event. So I think there might be special timetables, there might be trains running with greater frequency to bring people in and out of the capital, because they've got to get here and go. They don't just appear on Lambeth Bridge from nowhere, Michelle. They have to come from all over the country. And that they will be coming from all over the country.
And I'll tell you, the safety and security as well, the planning that must go into some of this. Because when I went to Buckingham Palace, I was quite surprised, actually, at how I was sitting by the fountain just outside the palace gates, and you got, like, some railings. And I found it quite interesting that people were coming along on push bikes, and then they were chaining these bikes up to the railings and then wandering off with their flowers. And I thought to myself, anything could be in this kind of bag thing on that bike, and I found it a little bit odd.
You've got to be very concerned about things like this, but you've also got to be very relaxed. I mean, one of the things watching the cortege as it moved along the Royal Mile today, and you had not only the late Queen, but of course you had the King, the Princess Royal, and the Queen's two other sons, walking in line that close to people. I mean, you know, anything could have happened. Nothing did happen. Anything could have happened. You have to take certain risks with security if you're the King, because you have to be able to show yourself. Just stopping as he did in order to go up to people for that spontaneous walkabout. Yeah,
and there is a balance, Cathy, isn't there, between you want, I guess, if you are in the monarchy, you want to almost feel accessible while simultaneously feeling safe as well.
Well, it's sobering to remember that Friday it was a month since Salman Rushdie was stabbed.
Yeah.
In a very safe environment at a little literary festival. So, yeah, I just hope they're wearing... Prince Charles has got his bulletproof singlet on.
Doesn't he looks pretty trim dressed up as a field marshal there. He doesn't look as though he's wearing too much Kevlar under that uniform.
Rafe, of course, Prince Andrew was there as well in that procession today, not in any form of kind of military uniform. He was there in a smart suit, but a suit nonetheless. Is it just as simple as he's lost some of his official titles and therefore that's why he was there in his plain suit? Is it slightly more complicated than that? Because as I understand it, he is going to be wearing some form of military attire at the vigil in a few days' time.
He's lost his colonelcies in chief, and certainly that you will remember at the time of the funeral of his father, the Duke of Edinburgh, the decision was made that all of the royal family would be wearing mourning dress. The reason for that, obviously, was to spare the embarrassment of Prince Harry and of the Duke of York. Now, but as you say, I mean, today we saw him wearing his medals and his Garter Star, so he is wearing his medals even if he isn't in a military uniform, because he earned those and has every right to wear those medals and they can't be taken away from him. But, yes, as out of respect for Her Majesty, we're told, he is being allowed to don uniform exceptionally on one occasion, and that is for the Vigil of the Princes, which will take place around the coffin as it lays in rest in St Giles Cathedral.
What uniformly wear?
That's a good question. I would think it would have to be a naval uniform because of the colour, but I don't know what else he would have to wear.
And he's been given the job to look after the corgis, hasn't he? That's what.
Oh well, there's always one person
really
in the family.
them.
But I thought the poor man, it's so symbolic. He's in the doghouse and he's been given the dogs.
There you go. I'll leave you all, shall I, this evening to ponder your thoughts on that fascinating stuff. Many thanks to my panel this evening. That's all we've got time for. The royal broadcaster and historian Rafe Hiddle-Mancu, Conservative life peer Daniel Moylan, and the author Kathy Letts. Thank you very much, and thank you as well for your company. Let me know, by the way, will you be going to see the Queen laying in state? Get in touch, gbnews@gbnews.uk is the email. Let me know your thoughts on all the goings-on over the next few days. Up next, Nigel Farage. Good evening to you, Nigel. Oh, sorry. Nigel's not there. No worries. We're back just to us. What was we just saying? Because I interrupted. Who else?
Well, we talked about Prince Andrew and wearing...
what will he wear?
And what role he's going to play. I think this is a time that every member of the family needs to be... they've all lost a mother, and that, I think, is the important thing that we need to think about when we're considering members of the royal family, and it's right that he's there.
Yeah, and Rafe, I'll ask you this question actually before we go, because someone else, Gwen, has just emailed in. Someone else was doing it early on as well, saying Camilla is not the Queen; she is the Queen consort.
Well, no, she is the Queen. Technically, she's Queen consort, but we've never styled the spouses of the king that under the common law you take your status from your husband. Just as much as she was actually legally Princess of Wales as the wife of the Prince of Wales, so she is legally the Queen. We never referred to King George V's wife as Queen Consort Mary. She was Queen Mary. Similarly, the Queen Mother was Queen Elizabeth when she was married to King George VI. Yes, she's a Queen Consort, but the Queen was a Queen Regnant. But it's unwise to use that phrasing. I think it might be helpful to some people to have that phrasing until the funeral, when you're trying to say the Queen Consort paid tribute to the Queen rather than the Queen paid tribute to the Queen. But certainly once the funeral takes place, I think it's time to put that to bed. And also, I think we should stop saying King Charles III. We never referred constantly to Queen Elizabeth II. It's the King or it's King Charles.
Yeah, and I must say, because this is all so new to lots of us, and of course, as we were just talking about at the start of the programme, King Charles III, for certainly my lifetime, has been Prince Charles. So this is a big adjustment for all of us at the moment, isn't it? It will take some time, I guess, until everything beds in properly. But what you're saying is that post the funeral, we should just have the King and the Queen, in your mind?
Well, we should definitely have it post-funeral. We should start doing it more often now. But I can understand why it's helpful in certain situations with certain phrasings to introduce it. But in general, I think we can start calling Her Majesty Queen Camilla or the Queen.
Yeah, interesting, because that is something I've had quite a lot of emails in. Anyway, final thoughts to either of you two before we head off?
Well, to Kathy.
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, it's been such a shock, hasn't it? We've had it for a week. We've been in shock because she looked so well, didn't she? Just 2 days before she died, she was meeting the new Prime Minister. And we all thought she'd be writing herself one of her 100th birthday cards. Dear me, happy 100th.
Dear me, have a good one.
So I think we are kind of still reeling from the shock of it, even though she was such an advanced age.
I think it's showing the country at its best. Makes us all, I think, very proud to be part of this national story.
Yeah, and indeed it is history in the making. All of these things that we're talking about, dissecting, enjoying, these are the things that our children will be learning about for years and years to come. Right, that is all we've got time for. So thanks again to my panel, and thank you for your company at home. Do let me know your thoughts. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. How are you feeling at the moment? Do you have any plans, perhaps to go and visit the Queen's coffin when she arrives in London? Let me know all of your thoughts. For now, have a wonderful weekend. Have a wonderful evening, should I say. And I shall see you the same time tomorrow, 6 o'clock. See you then.